welcome back to the channel. Today I got a few gameplays for you. One on Beach Bog here, and then I have one coming up right after on Backlot on Modern Warfare Remastered, which is one of my favorite games this generation. One of the few highlights, let's just say that. So, getting into that, the topic of today's video is the tragedy that is the current generation of Call of Duty. So, Call of Duty really started getting big back in 2007 with Modern Warfare, the original, Call of Duty 4. And that's when it really took off. Then you had World at War right after, which was a great game. MW2, then you had Black Ops 1, Modern Warfare 3, and then Black Ops 2 to top it off. That was the last generation on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. And that was what I would say would be the heydays of the franchise. It's when it peaked with player counts, with sales, with all that stuff before microtransactions came into play. So it was really just a raw experience. You got what you paid for in a sense. And that all changed pretty quick when we moved to this current gen with the Xbox One release and PlayStation 4 release back in 2013. So the launch title with those releases of those consoles was Call of Duty Ghosts. Now, I've said this in the previous video, I think it was my first video, I like Ghosts. That's when I had my friends were still playing the game. It was more of a slow-paced game, which I was a fan of. I was obviously a fan of Call of Duty 4, which is more slow-paced and stuff like that. But I'm also a fan of fast-paced, like MW2 and Black Ops 2, I guess, would be fast-paced. So yeah, I was a huge fan of Ghost. I wasn't a huge fan. I was a fan. I enjoyed my time with the game, but it was mixed reactions from the community. A lot of people said they didn't like it. They said the maps there was some bad maps, slow, campy. They say the graphics were a little bit bland and washed, and I can agree with all those critiques. But I still think at that time, it was obviously boots on the ground, which we'll get into later how that changed. It was still a solid game to start off the next console generation. The problem with the game actually at release is it released a month earlier on November 5th, 2013. And the actual console was released a few weeks later, 3 weeks I believe, on the 22nd. I just looked it up before this video, the 22nd of November that same year. So there was a time period there when you had to have it on the old gen and then switch over to the new gen if you wanted to play it. Me personally, I just waited the 3 weeks, which was tough for me because I'm a huge Call of Duty fan. Obviously, that's why I'm doing this channel. And I've been playing for a while. But I did it. I waited the 3 weeks and just got it right brand new when I bought my Xbox One on the 22nd. But yeah, that was the start off of this current generation of Call of Duty. It's a little rough, but it was manageable. It was a good starting point to then build upon that and get to the next game. So that brings me to the next game. And this is when it kind of, I say it started to really go downhill when they wanted to try to innovate, and that's when Advanced Warfare comes into play. Sledgehammer Games, their first Call of Duty, they did help Infinity War with MW3, but I don't want to count that because this is their first standalone title. So we weren't really sure about this development team, and we were like, all right, let's just give this a shot. I remember when they announced Advanced Warfare, I was very skeptical. Obviously, it's something we've never seen before. And every year, people say, Call of Duty is the same game every year, just reskinned. They need changes. It's boring. And I can somewhat agree with that, but for me, I've always enjoyed the current format of the game. So I didn't really need some drastic change to keep my interest. So that brings us to Advanced Warfare and the jetpacking. So this added another element of verticality, more fast-paced, chaotic gameplay, I would say, than ever before, because people can be any which way. And this was not looked good upon by the community and myself. I was not a fan. I thought it was unnecessary change to the game. They were trying, basically, Call of Duty lost its identity. It got away from being the tactical first-person shooter that it is to more of a chaotic copycat of other releases at the time. Obviously, we talked about this in the former game. Vince Zampella, the guy who used to work for Infinity War with Call of Duty, left Activision and moved to form his own development team with Respawn Entertainment. They made a game called Titanfall, and Titanfall brought this jetpacking, wall-running stuff to the franchise. They brought that to their franchise, and Call of Duty thought it was a good idea to take that and then replicate it in their own games, which I think is a big mistake, and it really showed a lack of innovation and passion for the franchise. They were just kind of copying everything else everybody else was doing, and we'll get into that later with Rainbow Six Siege and Black Ops 4 and stuff like that. So, coming from Advanced Warfare, it wasn't very good. They started copying games like Halo, Titanfall with the futuristic stuff and the jetpacking, and I thought they really lost their way in a sense there. So, coming from Advanced Warfare, after that game would be Black Ops 3. So Black Ops 3 came out, and Black Ops 3 was Treyarch's next big game. Obviously, coming off of World at War, Black Ops 1, Black Ops 2, these guys were considered at that, now that Infinity Ward was all in shambles. This was the next development team that everyone could rely on for a good product. And we then, sorry about that, I just had to fix my settings. We then had to deal with the wall running and jetpacking again for the second year in a row. So this was a problem I found for me, because this was the indicator that this was going to be the new norm. This was going to be the new way the game took the franchise forward. And I think at this point, people were starting to get fed up. They're like, what is going on? Let's go back to the old style. There's no need for this. Let's go back to boots on the ground. And I was one of those people. But Treyarch still did a good job with Black Ops 3. It was still a playable COD at least. The gunplay was pretty good. The zombies was good, obviously. The campaign was a disaster. Don't even want to get me started on that. But just looking at the multiplayer side, it was more of a toned down jetpacking style. So in Advanced Warfare, you would like bolt right up. And this one, it was more like a gradual, like more restrained, which I did like. But they obviously added the wall running from Titanfall, and that just it started to show bad signs. It was trending in the wrong direction. So I'm going to move on to the next year after that. So coming off Black Ops 3, Infinity War was back, coming off of Ghosts with Infinite Warfare. So what they did, everyone at that point, the most disliked trailer on YouTube of all time, when they announced Infinite Warfare, and people were not having it. This would be the third year in a row of jetpacks. People were tired of it. People wanted to go back to boots on the ground, and I don't blame them for that. It was just getting old and repetitive, really repetitive, because Infinite Warfare to me was an exact copy and paste job of Black Ops 3. The same movement, the same kind of specialists, and all that kind of stuff came into play. The specialists was a good thing because it was an attempt to innovate, but it just became it took away from the main gameplay, the gunplay and the kill streaks, and added a whole new element that I think wasn't really necessary. So I wasn't a fan at all of specialists. I'm still not today. So we're in Infinite Warfare, and what they did on the screen right now you're seeing Modern Warfare Remastered gameplay is Activision was working on Modern Warfare Remastered to release I think at some unknown time, and they said, you know what, no one's going to buy this game. We're going to have bad sales. So you know what we should do? We should tie in Modern Warfare Remastered as a bundle with Infinite Warfare. And then if you want to play Modern Warfare Remastered, which most people would want to play, the OGs who love this game, would have to buy Infinite Warfare. And that's what they did. It was a very scummy move. And everyone had to fork out like $120 to buy both games, which is ridiculous. But you have to do it if you want to play the Modern Warfare Remastered. So you had to do it. So you had to buy Infinite Warfare. So they saved themselves that year because the sales were still doing good with that. If they didn't do that, I think sales would have dropped off a lot, and it would have been bad for Activision because considering Call of Duty is their main franchise, it wouldn't have been good. They are a company after all. They trade on the stock market. They have to maximize profits for their shareholders. And it was a good move on their part, but it was scummy at the same time because they knew their product was bad, and they just try to recover from that. It just looks scummy on their part. Disagree with that. So moving on from that, Modern Warfare Remastered was a great game. It started off really bad. You couldn't do collaterals. The spawning was terrible. Some of the gunplay was off, but they quickly fixed it after a few months, and now it's a great remaster, and I couldn't be more happy with what they did. Coming off of that, we finally went back to boots on the ground with COD World War II. Sledgehammer Games comes back in after Advanced Warfare, and people didn't really like Advanced Warfare. It was okay, but everyone was finally excited to be done with the jetpacking and just finally get back to classic boots on the ground Call of Duty. World War II's launch was not good. I remember opening night, the game was crashing. You couldn't even play multiplayer. It was so buggy. And then you get to the actual gameplay, and the gameplay wasn't fun. The maps, they only had 9 ship maps. The maps weren't very good, very basic, plain, uninspired maps. It was the aim down sight speed. I remember you couldn't even run and shoot because the aim down sight speed was so slow. But then again, we all know about the big overhaul. It took 6 months. It took Michael Condrey to leave the studio in order for them to regroup and finally dish out a big update that completely overhauled the division system, which the division system was not good at launch, but then they quickly fixed it. And now, as it is today, it's great. It's a great idea, and it worked. It worked great once they did the big update. So kudos to them for that. I don't know who's in charge at that point once Mitochondria left, but whoever that person is, they did a great job of overhauling the game and making it at least playable for the last few months before we get to the next Call of Duty, which was Black Ops 4. Black Ops 4, in my opinion, was a rushed disaster. You could tell that they were trying to do something else, and at the last minute, I think they were trying to jetpack on it looked like, and at the last minute they switched it to boots on the ground because they saw the feedback from World War II and how everyone was tired of the previous 3 iterations of jetpack CODs. So they did that, and it turned out Black Ops 4 turned out to be a mess in my opinion. It was still Treyarch. That was the saddest thing about it. Treyarch, we had faith in. They had great games. Even Black Ops 3 was the best jetpack Call of Duty, and it was still playable. And they kind of took a step back. It looked like it was a mess at the studio. They couldn't figure it out. They couldn't come to one collective idea and I guess direction for the game. So it kind of just seemed like a mess, and it didn't seem. We're back to boots on the ground, which is nice, but I don't know. It just didn't. It didn't hit, you know. So this is a many calls in a row, as you can tell, as a pattern here. A lot of issues. Every single game, nothing seems to be complete from start to finish. It's always a work in progress, and that's my biggest gripe with this generation. So after that, we get to this year's Call of Duty, which is Modern Warfare, which has a lot of issues. Obviously, skill-based matchmaking, mini maps destroyed, low quality maps. Footsteps are insanely loud to make the game pretty much unplayable for rushers and anyone who wants to move. So you look at the games and you look at Modern Warfare this year, you look at Black Ops 4, you look at Black Ops 3, and it's just a lot of trying to live off the past, live off the reputation that you once had and now you no longer have. So you're trying to ride off those coattails and try to bring people back in, and people are just seeing the flaws. We're seeing that this game is not in the direction that we want to see it go in, and I'm getting fed up with it, honestly. It's they need to make a drastic change on the next generation coming up with the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. I hope they can make a jump, and we got Treyarch coming up with, I guess, a remaster of Black Ops. That's what the leaks are saying, which is fine. I like the Cold Era game, Vietnam kind of era of war. That should be good, but can they execute it? You know, that's the thing. So looking back at all the games in this current gen of Call of Duty, it's a disaster. That's why the video is called The Tragedy of Current Gen Call of Duty, because they had something so good on last gen. Everything was clicking on all cylinders, and they destroyed it. They butchered it, and they lost their identity. They lost their way, and it's going to take a lot to get people's trust back. People are tired of it. People don't trust Activision anymore. Obviously, the big story of this year's this current gen would be microtransactions. I should probably get into that real quick before the video ends. Microtransactions came in with its supply drops in Advanced Warfare, and they've been here ever since. They've taken over the game. They've locked content behind these paywalls, and you can't really get the full experience of a game when you have to spend more after the initial purchase price of the game, which is $60 American, $80 Canadian. I'm a Canadian, by the way, so $80 for me, which is a lot of money for Call of Duty. If you're not even getting the full release of the game at release, you know, you have to buy extra content, and they update the game throughout. So it's in a bad state right now. Obviously, the free maps and the lack of season pass in this game makes it better, but it still has a lot of ways to go. So I thank you for watching the video. Thank you for the support, and I will see you next time.